Hello and welcome to a very special edition of ISG Smartalks, the podcast where we discuss how technology is transforming business. Now, in each episode, we try to educate, to inspire and entertain our listeners. And whilst we will, of course, endeavour to be as entertaining in this episode as we can, our primary objective today is to educate and inspire you, our listeners, on a very important and serious topic. So today we'll be discussing COVID-19 or the coronavirus, and specifically how to cope during the coronavirus, how to best utilize technology, how to work with your technology suppliers during what are very difficult times for many businesses. We are without doubt experiencing one of, if not the biggest threat to our health and our economy in our lifetimes. We're in the midst of a global pandemic, the like of which we have not seen previously. Cases of COVID-19 are increasing at an exponential rate. We're closing borders, we're cancelling events, we're quarantining entire countries. We're having to make fundamental and uncomfortable changes to the way we live, the way we socialise, and of course the way we work, which is what we will be talking about today. Now, in this episode, I'm joined by two experts who will help us understand how the way we work is being impacted. They will help us to identify some practical things we can do to cope and to ensure that we're able to manage as well as we can as we experience coronavirus disruption. So, Bill Huber and Dave Lewis, guys, welcome to the podcast. So Bill and Dave are both ISG partners. They're experts in how to leverage technology in the right ways and through the best commercial models. But rather than me introducing both of you gentlemen, I will let you introduce yourselves. So, Bill, why don't you go first and just explain to our listeners who you are and what your role is at ISG and what you do for our clients.
Hi, Barry. So, yes, I'm the global partner for our software advisory practice. I've been with ISG for about 13 years. Prior to that, I spent a lot of work in both in the banking sector as well as in the defense sector, and often describe myself as a recovering chief procurement officer. So that's really where I got my start, and currently really focused on helping companies to acquire the new technology that they need to drive their businesses forward in the digital era and do it in the smartest possible way.
Great, thank you very much. I've never heard that before. The recovering chief procurement officer. I'm sure there's a group for people like you. So, Dave, why don't you do the same, please?
Sure. My name is David Lewis. I'm also a partner, as you mentioned, within ISG. I've been with ISG now almost 20 years, and I run our manufacturing, communications, and media and entertainment industry practices. And my mission is really to help clients achieve sustainable improvements in their business operations, whether that's through digital transformation, improving speed to market, finding new revenue streams, finding ways to reduce costs to fund these activities, and generally to become more competitive in the marketplace.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. And today we're going to be having a discussion around the coronavirus, what it's meant to the way we work, what technology we're needing to use now. Many of us are working from home, how to procure that technology at the right price levels, how to help businesses to reduce their costs or improve their revenue during what are going to be difficult times. So we will have I've got a few questions to ask the guys, and then we'll have a discussion around all things coronavirus and work related. But first, from my perspective, I am working from home. I happen to live by the sea, and you will probably hear, being picked up by my microphone, seagulls squawking in the background. So apologies for that if you can hear the odd squeak. It's not me, it's the seagulls. But inevitable, I suppose, and very relevant for the topic which we're about to discuss, in that, you know, the vast majority of the workforce will be working from home and having to cope with seagulls, as well as family members, as well as, you know, sharing desks and Wi-Fi connections, etc. But we'll come on to that. So, guys, let me start by saying, you know, we're seeing different countries cope in very different ways. We saw China respond relatively rapidly to the coronavirus where it started, and they now seem to be in control. In Europe, we're seeing, you know, Italy, Spain, and France now in lockdown, struggling to control the infections. We see Germany and the UK not far behind. You know, as you know, we shut pubs and restaurants in the UK, or we've been encouraged not to go to them as of yesterday. So we know it's a big deal when pubs in in the UK and in Ireland are in lockdown. So we know this is a big deal. We saw the US stop flights from Europe last week, and President Trump announced a state of emergency. So how do things feel on the ground in the US? What is it like day to day? Are people coping? Are they worried? Are they scared? Dave, why don't you start? What does it feel like where you are?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of different emotions. Of course, at first in the U.S., we were watching it go on in other places, China, South Korea, all the hotspots that we're aware of. And I think there was initially an element of that can't happen here. And rapidly that has changed as we've seen the numbers of folks that are testing positive, the number of folks that are dying, quite frankly, in many different states. I think, what has gone from disbelief is a little bit of scariness around. Many of the grocery stores don't have products like paper towels and toilet paper and disinfectant wipes. We're now starting to see, as you just said, just today, I live in Florida, they announced the closing of all restaurants and bars. So I think there's rapidly becoming, it can't happen here, to, oh my gosh, this is really happening. You add in the fact that the stock market has dropped precipitously. So people are worried about their income. Are they still going to have a job tomorrow? Many small businesses are being heavily affected as they either don't see any foot traffic because people are staying home, or they run a business that's being told to close down. So I think we're starting to see an increasing level of people being afraid of what's going to happen next. And of course, the real difference here than what we've seen before in past situations like this is through social media, we are getting rapid updates of what's going on. It's not like you got to wait for the nightly news like in years gone by. You see constant updates of what's going on. Some of it's true, some of it's not. So I think people are really just starting to try to figure out what should they be doing. And we're seeing more and more people stay home. And of course, the implications that brings.
Yeah, I think the double whammy we have here that I don't think we've ever seen before is, we've had economic challenges before, we've had recessions before, we've seen the stock market collapse before, and we've sort of coped with that. But we're seeing that at the same time as social distancing and isolation is being implemented, and we're having to stay at home while this is happening. And inevitably we'll see businesses really challenge. Imagine if you're a high street retailer, or you're an airport retailer like one of our clients is right now. There's no one in the high street and there's no one in the airports. Or if you're a hotel or a restaurant chain or a health club, you're a cinema, a cruise line, your business is inevitably going to be adversely impacted by all of this social distancing. So it really is a challenge, I think, globally, as we all follow these same precautions. But Bill, what do you think? Do you think I've just said, I suppose we've never seen anything like it before, and it feels to me like a natural disaster, almost like we're preparing for war. It's a strange one, right? Is there anything you can think of which is we could compare it to?
No, it's like a natural disaster in slow motion, isn't it? We all watch it, and we get these frequent updates many times a day. Dave mentioned social media, and I think that may actually have somewhat of a mitigating effect on people's reaction. And I know that, we often talk about social media whipping people up in a frenzy, but I think we also see a little bit of an inoculation effect just because people have to some degree become a little bit desensitized, and the, constant drip of updates and new news to some degree, I think may help people put things in context. Because there will always be a variety of opinions. Folks will say what they actually see going on the ground. When there's some alarmist reports coming out, they'll say, well, yes, that's that did happen here, but it was only a 5-minute thing, and then these things happened, and people came together. So I think that's something we didn't have in prior environments to a large degree. Even in the financial crisis of 2008. We still had a much lower level of social media back then than we do now. I am also seeing a lot of people that are, to some degree, finding inspiration in all of this, because to some degree, it's giving us all an ability to reimagine how we ought to be doing things, given the fact that we have to be innovative and creative in functioning and providing for our loved ones and our work colleagues and being productive in this time. And so I think long-term, a lot of positive things will actually come out of this. But but there'll be a lot of work between now and then.
Yeah, I think that's right, Bill. And I certainly hope we will see some positive outcomes coming out of what will inevitably be a difficult time. And I think you're right. If you think schools are cancelled now and universities in many countries, we haven't cancelled schools yet in the UK, but I think it's probably inevitable. And I think then we will then, children were, and I was talking to Roberto and a colleague in Italy, who was saying initially when they cancelled schools, the children thought, oh, it's like I'm being on holiday for a week. And then pretty quickly they got online tutorials and online curriculum, and the children have fallen into this rhythm of working from home in the same way that they would in school in many ways, in that they're following the same curriculum and they're working very, very hard, and they've made it work very quickly. And I wonder whether we will fall into that new way of children studying, or university students studying in the same way as we may do at work, which we'll come on to in a second. But I also think if I think of an example for me, I've wanted to see my mother, who's 81, who's been mentioned in our previous podcasts and is an avid listener. And I wanted to go and see her tomorrow and said, Mum, I'll pop in and see you. And she said, oh, no, please don't. She's worried about me going to see her. So she called me on WhatsApp and we had a video call, which she was never done before. And she's done with all of her children. She's using technology in different ways to try and cope with, what is a very, a new experience for her and a difficult time. None of us know how long this is going to last or how big an impact it is going to be. And so we all need to be thinking about our planning in a sort of short, medium and long-term scenarios to give us some flexibility depending on, how this plays out, because we just don't know. But let me ask Dave, you a question around the changing world of work as a result of this. Are we seeing the pandemic change the way we work? Inevitably we are, because so many of us now that are able to work from home are being asked to work from home, and offices are being closed. Do you think most businesses are in a position to be able to handle remote working?
Well, most businesses do have technologies and processes in place for remote working. The problem is most of them don't use it significantly, and therefore they don't have enough of it, given the amount of folks that are working from home. The scalability of our remote access solutions and the associated security solutions aren't necessarily there. And what we're seeing our clients do, we work with clients all the time. One is, we're told don't come to the client site anymore. So most clients are saying, we don't want our contractors or our advisors or our consultants coming. So now we have to work with them remotely. Now we're also starting to see the clients themselves are telling their employees not to come and work. So this is all causing us to scale up how we work together. How do you collaborate with people when you're having to work from home? And so we're starting to see companies either expand the solutions they already have in place or look for new solutions that they can come in place and put in place very rapidly and scale up very rapidly. The trick is you can put the technology in place, but you also have to put the processes and the ways of working in place that are supported by the technology. So there's almost a change management element here around managing remote workforces and getting them to collaborate and work together. And I think that's the challenges that we're starting to see with our HR departments and so forth across pretty much all industries are being affected in a similar fashion.
Yeah. And if there are, have we come across clients yet or industries or businesses, let's say, who have had to move to remote working now and just haven't or have realized that they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the technology, they don't have the processes and are really struggling in the last couple of weeks? Are there any examples of that we've seen yet? And if that's the case, how quickly is it realistic for organizations to put new technology in place to enable them to cope with this remote working? Bill, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll give you a very personal example. So I'm, instead of going through my computer for this conversation, I'm actually using a traditional phone because I'm concerned we've had gaps in bandwidth, and recent conversations have 5% or 10% of the time come across sounding a little bit like Darth Vader. So there are clearly bandwidth issues around in the public networks as well as in a lot of the corporate networks. And it's something where we're going to have to raise that capacity quickly. I think Dave mentioned the security issues, and clients are going to have to set out guidelines in terms of what types of business can be conducted within a VPN and what kind do you not require the VPN for normal day-to-day communications and things like that. People just are not used to having to work outside of their office environment in many cases. And so simply getting them in the habit and getting them comfortable and getting them productive and efficient in working in these new ways will simply take time. But I'm looking to see how the market will be able to react in terms of making more bandwidth available quickly and scaling it, and how our clients are going to be able to quickly acquire and scale up the additional technology they need.
If you've got an organization that reaches out to us as ISG to says, I think I've got a challenge, guys. We don't have the right technology or the right bandwidth for my workforce to work from home because we haven't prepared for this particular scenario before. How can ISG best support them in getting that in place quickly?
Yeah, I think, the key is to understand what are the best solutions that can be implemented quickly and scaled rapidly. And historically, what we have found is most clients have, solutions that are on-premise, they're dedicated to themselves, which typically makes them difficult to scale up, certainly in a rapid fashion. What you find now is there are cloud-based solutions for collaboration and other types of communication technologies that, because they're in the cloud, they can be scaled very rapidly, they can be implemented very rapidly. And then it's a general trend we've seen anyway, move to cloud-based solutions. I think these types of events are only going to accelerate the use of cloud solutions because you can scale the network. If you have a software-defined networks, you can scale your bandwidth fairly rapidly. And if you have cloud-based collaboration and communication solutions, those can also be implemented and scaled pretty rapidly. And, we have advisory capability to help clients both on the technology side of what should I buy, who should I buy it from, what's the right price, can I do it quickly, what are the risks, but also can help with, okay, now I have the technology, how do I effectively use it? And that entails engaging your workforce in some organizational change management of how do you work differently from home than you do in the office and those sorts of things. So there's a variety of things that can be done both from a technology and from a human factor point of view. And, we're ready and prepared to take questions from clients at any time in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Dave. We should say to our listeners, if you're at all in doubt, please do give us a call. We'd be very happy to provide some advice to try and help businesses through this difficult time. I think the human side of it is interesting as well, isn't it? Because it's not just having the technology. It's how do you actually, when you're not going to an office, you're not physically meeting people, you're not looking in the eye or, shaking hands and agreeing actions and tasks and deals. It's a different way of working when you're having to work remote, a lot of the time. Now, we as technology consultants, we've been doing it for a long time. It's sort of the way we work quite often. We all work remotely most of the time. And so we're quite used to it. But a lot of organizations and employees aren't. And I think there are probably some really sensible, tips and advice around how we communicate and how they communicate now and handle meetings and handle projects from a human perspective in terms of taking actions and minutes and having a chairperson and how often they communicate and all of that type of rhythm and process, which would be valuable for organizations as well. So, Bill, from your perspective, from the human side, any thoughts on how best to achieve that for organizations that don't do it regularly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you work from home or work remotely, you need to, and you will tend to, A, work more efficiently, B, work more thoughtfully, and C, you'll tend to set different priorities in terms of what is important and what is less important. So from an efficiency standpoint, you don't have a lot of the water cooler type distractions that you have in an office. And that kind of gives you the ability to think through and plan things and be a lot crisper in your communication, be a lot more thoughtful about a lot of things. But it also means that you bear the risk of kind of being out of sight, out of mind. So you need to set up that discipline of regular touch points, regular cadence for meetings, more formality to your follow-up so that you do document things and say, hey, yesterday, to the point just made, we had a meeting. These are the things we agreed on. Here are the actions everyone has. Let's check and touch base on status of those in 2 days and in 4 days. So you start doing those things as a matter of course, rather than being able to walk by someone else's office or cubicle or desk and say, oh, that reminds me, did you follow up on that thing we talked about yesterday? You want to make sure that people know that they're not forgotten as well. So you need to be cognizant of all of the other members of your team. And some of them tend to be more extroverted. Some will more naturally be a little bit more introverted. So how are you going to reach out and virtually touch the other folks on your team to keep them engaged, keep them focused? Because there are a lot who are going to be worried about things but aren't going to necessarily share it. So keeping them productive, keeping them active, and quite frankly, in some cases, keeping them from going off the rails is going to require all of us to apply some leadership at whatever level in the organization we are, just in terms of being that social link to all of our colleagues as we work in this type of environment.
I've been encouraging all of my team to use video conferencing as a default now, rather than just phone conferencing, so that we can see each other, because I think that's going to be super important. And also making sure that when they work from home, they dress appropriately. They dress as if they're going to the office. They, step into their home office, wherever it might be in the house, and that they are dressed appropriately. And I don't mean, wearing a suit and tie necessarily, but not, sitting in your pajamas with the dog on your lap. I think we need that sort of discipline as well, because it's, it's a human nature. I think you work harder when you're dressed appropriately and you have some discipline and structure in your life, and telling them they need to work for an hour, then take a break, and then come back to the next meeting or the next session and try to be more disciplined. But it's not natural to people who haven't done it before. And remember, it's not every industry that it's possible to do that, right? If you're in retail and you've been working in a store, if you're in healthcare and you've been running a gym, if you're in cruise lines and you work on a cruise line, there are a lot of people now in society who can't work from home in the same way, just because it's not what they do. And so I think we need to be aware of those people as well, who will be stuck at home, unable to work, and very difficult times for them.
Yeah, so Barry, one other thing that we do need to consider, though, is, while it's best practice to have a pristine work environment, to do video calls, and to be dressed for success even in the home office, we also are going to have a lot of our colleagues who have young children who aren't at school. Normally you might leave them with the grandparents, but of course that's no longer an option.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, sometimes parents are going to have to go out and tussle with their kids outside for an hour in the middle of the day, and they'll come back in and try to conduct their business. So I think we just need to, and we'll have the dogs coming in and things like that. So there needs to be an increased level of compassion and understanding and flexibility, because people are trying to be productive, and there are just some things that are, in the scheme of things, we'll work through, and we have to kind of balance out, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Well, I think we need to be sympathetic to the fact that all of those things, as you absolutely are absolutely right in saying, we've got to be sympathetic to people, the way people work, and the sort of factors that they're going to have to juggle in terms of dogs and kids and noise and all of the other things that go with it. So I think you're absolutely right, Bill. Let me turn the conversation slightly into other areas of cost reduction. So if we do experience the prolonged period of uncertainty and economic challenge, for many businesses, they will be they'll be struggling, right? They'll be thinking about ways that they can reduce their costs, that they can become as efficient as they can possibly be while they manage through this difficult times. Are there areas, obvious areas where they should be looking to try to optimize their costs? And we talked a little bit about I suppose in a way we have in remote working technology, but maybe let's try and bring that to life a bit. Dave, are there areas where, we think about networks, we think about software licenses, are there other obvious areas that organizations should start to look at to try and manage their cost base?
Yes, there certainly is. And, many companies have been doing this for other reasons already. As you know, we've had some trade barriers and tariffs and so forth that have really affected some industries. So we've already had some industries that were having some revenue and cost issues. And this coronavirus has just caused more dislocation across more industries, and it's happening very rapidly. So we have many clients coming to us and saying, my revenue is going to be down X%. I got to get my costs down in line, and I need to do it rapidly. What do I do? And we recommend that clients look across their entire enterprise, whether it's their IT estate, whether it's their business process functions, software, hardware, all of your licenses, all of your labor costs, all of your contract costs, and really do a quick scan across all of your cost categories to try to identify where are the areas you might be able to tighten up to be more in line with what the market expects. So we recommend clients quickly go through a scan of all their cost categories, compare those into the market, build a heat map of what costs they think are affectable and what timeline they can affect them. We think there are certain costs that you can impact very quickly, what we would call quick hits. And those are things like, looking at your wireless costs, your telecom costs, any of your rate-based costs that you can go quickly renegotiate labor rates, looking at your software, your network, your cloud, all those costs often can be impacted fairly quickly. Doing forensics around all of your invoices for your third-party suppliers. We often find that those invoices are inaccurate. So now might be a timely point in time to look at that. Automation. So there's 2 points of automation. One is it can help reduce costs, but also functions that require people that may no longer be there. You can use automation to replace some of the functions that people perform as well. So you can do a rapid automation assessment and see where you can quickly apply some bots to replace people and reduce costs. So there's a number of things you can do in a matter of weeks, but we recommend that people really take a long-term approach. Let's find some quick hits that can help me immediately, but also let's look at the medium and long term. As long as we're looking at our cost base, don't just look at today. Let's try to prepare for the future. This will pass eventually. So you want to be able to position for recovery. Then you want to be able to position yourself for growth beyond that. So we recommend looking at areas where you might be able to source non-strategic functions. Are there some cognitive solutions you can put in place? Can you build your governance capability and ramp that up and put some platforms in place to manage your third-party ecosystem? And then looking longer term, do you have a bunch of technical debt that maybe now is the right time to remove? Can you rationalize your application portfolio? Can you rationalize your software estate? Can you put some digital transformation solutions in place that will position you for recovery and growth long term? So our recommendation is quite simply do a quick scan, identify those quick hits, and then build a roadmap for those things you can do 3 to 6 months out, and then maybe things that are longer term. And, companies like ISG are available to help you do those scans and identify you and build the heat maps and the roadmaps of cost reduction and can help you execute if that's something you need as well.
No, I think that's really good, very sensible and practical advice, and that definitely has some, to sound like a consultant, some low-hanging fruit that we could help organizations to look at to help reduce costs in the very short term during these difficult times. Bill, what about how organizations fund this type of support? There'll be a lot of businesses out there, and hopefully some people listening to this saying, well, yeah, we really do need to tighten our belts and reduce costs, but we can't afford right now to spend consulting dollars. We don't have that project budget right now because of the difficult times we're facing, but we still need to do it. What are the commercial models that can be put in place to avoid the upfront costs and to try and make it easier for businesses as they go through the coronavirus challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a couple of different things that the company should think about in terms of of funding and realizing the savings for these types of activities. First of all, there are some activities that lend themselves to fairly fast savings, and very often those things can be done, almost on a gain share basis. And those are where the projects will in fact be self-funding. The savings will occur in year. They can pay for any cost of achieving them and contribute to the bottom line. So those are among the first things to look at because they can help you build momentum and to fund other things which require more organizational change to achieve, and therefore have a longer time towards impact. So the second point of this is do what you can quickly to take out the costs now, things that can reduce your current cost of operations. Obviously, all discretionary spending is by nature discretionary. So things like travel and entertainment, those have already been stopped just because companies can't do it anyway. But there are, besides the short-term technology rationalization and repricing of certain agreements and not buying certain things and demand management activities, those longer structural things are going to be required because you're still not going to be able to save as much money in the short term to offset, potential short-term impact to your revenue, especially if you're in industries like hospitality and travel right now, where your revenue is a fraction of what it would normally be. So for those, you need to think about continuing that savings longer term. And so you start those activities now, but you may not see the benefit for things like rationalizing your application, resolving some of your technical debt, or long-term restructuring and rethinking your overall back office target operating model and putting a new one in place. So those are very, very important things to get started on, and because they'll enable you to recover more quickly. And then, lastly, Dave touched on this, but those new transformational initiatives, which are going to allow you to operate down the road at a lower price point as well as a more effective delivery capability, are going to be critical to coming out of this thing and getting momentum and rebuilding your business and perhaps improving your market share from where it was. And those companies that are able to think through those decisions and those strategies now are going to perhaps find themselves coming through as in a more disruptive position than they were when they went in. Our current crisis is going to really reset the game for a lot of companies. So smart businesses are going to think through now, how can they come out of this stronger at the other end?
Again, clients are starting to look, and we're encouraging them to look to cloud-based solutions. Why is that? People have been moving rapidly to cloud and as-a-service solutions previously, mostly for the speed and agility it provides. But people often forget that it's also the scalability that it provides. And typically, it's utilization-based pricing. And so when your business goes down, like is happening now, your utilization is going to go down, your pricing will go down. But when your business recovers and it starts to accelerate the growth period again, you can also grow rapidly. What we've been seeing some companies do is when they need to reduce costs, they just start cutting headcounts, which is something you can do very quickly. But once those bodies are out and once the knowledge is gone, what do you do when your business comes back? You don't have the people and you don't have the knowledge you once had, and you can't put it back together very rapidly. Whereas as-a-service solutions and cloud solutions, when utilization goes down, your costs go down with it. When you're ready to grow, those solutions will grow with you. So we're starting to see more and more impetus to go to cloud and as-a-service solutions because of the scalability and not just the speed and agility that has been the typical impetus for companies to move that direction.
The pandemic may be the tipping point, which really shifts tremendous amount of volume from traditional on-premise work and on-premise software to the cloud. Yeah. This could be the thing that accelerates it massively.
Yep, I agree with you both. Yeah, this may be the point in time that changes the way vast numbers of organizations use cloud-based and as-a-service technology. I have a final topic I wanted us to talk about, or I want us to talk about, which is around the way businesses work with third-party suppliers. Many of our clients and many global businesses inevitably have a large reliance on supply chains and heavy reliance on third parties. And just as the client businesses themselves are struggling, it's difficult times, it's also very difficult times for their service providers. They probably didn't have contracts written for a pandemic like this. The workers who work for them will be working from home and may not be equipped. What advice would you give to our clients who are very heavily reliant on third parties? Are there any tips we would give them for thinking about those third party contracts? Some advice we could give them at this difficult time. Dave, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, so I think the first thing and most important is to be communicating with your providers, your service providers. Let's have an open, transparent discussion around, do you have challenges as a provider to help me? And are there ways that I can help you work around that? We always recommend clients have a very strong third-party governance capability, but it's critical in these times because there's a great risk that service providers, perhaps due to circumstances out of their control, are no longer compliant with certain provisions of your contract. Well, if you're not managing your contract well, you won't even know that. But there's other critical things like, do they have business continuity plans? We do lots of contracts with companies, and oftentimes disaster recovery and business continuity are kind of secondary considerations in a contract because people have this that'll never happen attitude. Well, guess what? It's happening right now, and we are needing to invoke business continuity plans that either may not exist or maybe they haven't been tested in years. So if you're getting services from India, for example, do they have a secondary delivery center where they can move work if it's, in a less affected region? Do they have the remote access capabilities that they need to have? So I think we recommend looking at your contracts, making sure that you're getting, the deliverables and obligations that you are entitled to. And if not, you need to be working with your service provider to figure out, is this a circumstance they can work around, or if not, are there secondary sources of supply that you can go to? But people are now starting to open up their business continuity plans like they never did before, and some of them are disappointed to find out either they don't exist, they're inadequate, or they've never been tested. And in the middle of a crisis is not the time you want to be testing your business continuity plan.
Yeah, very good practical advice. What about, I've heard force majeure be mentioned a few times in client context over the last week or two. Bill, in your experience, is a global pandemic like this fall under the force majeure clause in an outsourcing contract?
Well, it's funny, Barry, because as you can imagine, every law firm in the world has been publishing an initial opinion on the applicability of force majeure, and most of them fall into a couple main points. If the pandemic is specifically called out as part of the conditions of force majeure, then it would most likely apply. If it isn't specifically called out, it may or may not apply. Also, if the contract was negotiated after there was awareness of the growing risk of COVID-19 versus prior, will have an impact in terms of how the courts may interpret it. But frankly, all of the opinions are largely speculative because it's not settled law at this point. This is an unprecedented situation. Yeah. And what's really coming out from all of the communications from the law firms is that this is likely to be a complex issue, and let us help you work through it, which, I think bears merit. But it's funny because they're also coming down on both sides. They want to help the suppliers or the providers to protect themselves from enforcement of force majeure, and help the buyers in enforcing force majeure. And it's so I kind of look at it a little bit differently. I know that will all get sorted out, and some of those rulings are going to be costly, but there may quite likely or quite possibly be also some legislative effects that come out to sort of handle things and prevent things from being too one-sided or another. Because ultimately what we want to do is to not block communication between providers and suppliers and their clients, but rather improve transparency so that collectively we can kind of work out pragmatic solutions that require dialogue to do it. So from a buyer perspective, there may be things in your current statement of work that in the current scheme of things are no longer absolutely must-have activities, while they would be absolutely must-have activities, in under more normal circumstances. There will also be areas where the provider's capacity is going to be stretched thin. But how do you have those pragmatic conversations to allow for temporary relief in some areas in order to assure absolute high performance in those areas that are most critical at this time? Those are conversations I think that buyers and sellers need to be having internally to identify what those risk areas are, and then to open up the conversations with their partners and make sure there's a clear understanding of how things are being handled, and where there are potential gaps or risks, work through a workaround that will kind of keep things moving and give protection to what needs to be protected in the overall relationship. And that's going to take a lot of work on all sides to really do that and do it well. And we just call out to everyone in the business community to recognize that we're all kind of united against a common enemy in this case, and we're all trying to work through it together. So some patience and some compassion, along with just some good intelligent planning, are all going to be required.
Yep, very, very sage advice. Thank you.
There's another very one other point I would make, Barry, is that this coronavirus is really causing many industries and companies within, for example, manufacturing and retail and consumer packaged goods, reevaluating their supply chain and how well they understand their supply chain. You take a look at a company like Apple that makes a lot of its components in China, and China just closed down all of their plants. Well, guess what? Now you don't have the materials you need to assemble your products, and that's happening to many industries. So companies are dealing with supply chain discontinuities. They're trying to find, alternative modes of transport. They're trying to find alternative suppliers. They're trying to find alternative resources that they might be able to use in their products. But there's a lot of challenges there. But what that is causing folks to do is figure out how they can use digital technologies to improve their supply chain visibility, so that they can rapidly understand where they have supply chain problems and how to react to those problems and work around it. And there's a lot of technologies around machine learning, artificial intelligence, putting sensors in your products so that you can understand what are the risks and opportunities that arise, whether it's through geopolitical risks, whether it's through weather patterns, whether it's through global health risks such as this. So the downside of this is we are seeing companies starting to invest heavily into improving their supply chain visibility so that they can at least mitigate the types of situations that we're seeing today, if not totally work around them.
No, great point, Dave. Yeah, thank you very much. So, gentlemen, let me say a big thank you, but also to leave on a positive. So, we're seeing examples from all over the world of where communities are coming together and helping each other, whether it's on social media where people are getting groceries for other people, or businesses offering to do things on a free basis to help out other businesses that are struggling. There's lots and lots of examples, and I think we will see a positive from this challenging time through community spirit. And if you can cast your mind back to 1665, and it might be too much for some of us, but during the Great Plague, Isaac Newton developed his theories of calculus and optics while he was confined, to his home when Oxford University closed its doors to students. So something very good in the form of calculus and optics came out of the Great Plague in 1665, and maybe something similar will come out of this coronavirus challenge. If nothing else, it certainly taught my mum how to make a video call. So a big thank you to you, Dave Lewis, and a big thank you to Bill Huber. Really appreciate you guys joining us, and I hope you found it interesting and valuable. Thank you very much.
A pleasure, Barry.
Thank you, Barry.